Welcome to Glove Talk, your weekly news and boxing. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button. With that said, let's get into the news. Okay, so first we're going to break down the fights that happened this weekend. Anthony Yarde fought, also Velasquez fought. So we're going to talk about those real quick, and then we're going to get into the news going from the weight classes, going from the lightest to the heaviest. So let's first start off with Anthony Yarde and Spielman. I thought this was a pretty decent fight. Good to see Anthony Yarde again. I don't know what to make of Anthony Yarde, to be quite honest with you. A few things I like about him, and then I'll get to some of the things I'm be a little bit more critical of him. What I like about him, number one, is he's in amazing shape. He always shows up in great shape. When he gets on the scale, he looks phenomenal. You can't really fault him for that. Second of all, I like his attitude. He seems hungry. He seems very motivated. I always like to see that. He seems like he's always in camp. And even though he's had some issues in terms this year of, losing family members and just kind of overcoming things outside of the ring like that, he seems to be very positive. And it seems like Tunde, his trainer, is also trying to create an environment where, they can rely on each other. I love seeing that kind of bond between trainer and fighter. So that's something I really like about him. His power seems fantastic. One thing I noticed about him is that he doesn't telegraph his punches too much. His power, you'll see him throw a shot and it seems like it's kind of off the hip a lot of times with that lead left. And then you hear the noise when it lands. You're like, oh wow, okay, so he hit him pretty hard. He put some mustard behind that. So I like his power. I like the fact he doesn't telegraph too much. But what I don't like about him is, well, number one, that lead left, the way he has that really far down, that to me, it just kind of bugs me a little bit. Now, I think that he's been able to do that and kind of get away with that with with the caliber of fighters he's basically gone against. But once he starts stepping up, I think that's going to be an issue for him. He's kind of using his shoulder a lot and kind of shoulder rolling a lot and trying to use, his a little bit of slickness in there, and it works okay. But even we saw Spielman, land a few good shots on him here and there throughout the fight. A big problem I see later on for him is that if, we saw with Kovalev who beat him, just someone with a substantial jab and able to take advantage of that low left. I think that's going to be an issue for him once he starts stepping up in caliber of fighter. But that said, he did get the stoppage. Personally, I thought the stoppage was a little bit premature. It's always tough to tell unless you really can tell and see the guy wobbled visibly, or you can really look into the guy's eyes like the ref can to kind of see if he's there or not. Personally, I thought he was a little bit premature. Some people did as well. Some people were fine with it. Regardless, he gets the win. Good for him. Let's see where he goes from here. There were talks about him initially going to be fighting underneath the Dane Dubois Joe Joyce card. I don't think he's probably going to be doing that now, but who knows? Maybe he will fight again this year. If not, we'll see him probably early 2021. Now moving on to the Velasquez Zuski fight. This was an interesting fight because this is the fight basically after we saw Velasquez do pretty well against Crawford, and people got excited for him again. Going into the Crawford fight, he didn't have a great performance beforehand. And so people they really overlooked him. And Velasquez is a very solid fighter. I mean, boxing wise, his technique and his skill is certainly there. The power's there. But in this fight, he was losing bulk of the round. I am going to show the judges' scorecards. You'll see it right over here. There's one judge that wasn't quite seeing the fight the same way as the other judges, but other than the 5th round and the 7th round where he got the knockdown at the end, I mean, the judges were going for, Zuski. So I think this is kind of a little bit of a wake-up call to possibly that maybe Velasquez is one of those type of fighters where he has a tendency to fight at the level of whoever his opponent is. And some guys are like that. And for me, it's great that he got the stoppage, but he was losing the bulk of the rounds, and I just don't know really what to think of him, other than I know he has very substantial power. I know he has solid skill behind him, but I don't know. For me, I'm just not 100% confident in how he's going to progress or what to really make of him. I know a lot of people were very hyped on him as a prospect when he first came into the pros, but you know, he just hasn't been able to produce at a high level yet. Who knows? Maybe he'll make adjustments. Maybe he'll find new training. Maybe he'll be able to kind of, you know, adapt and overcome some of his shortfalls. But for me, I'm not super impressed by him. I think it's great that he did get that in the end, get the win. But like I said, not super impressed. With that said, now we're going to move into the various weight classes. First, we're going to talk about bantamweight with Inoue and Maloney, Jason Maloney and Inoue looking like they're going to be fighting for the title on October 31st in Las Vegas. This is exciting. I'm very excited to see this fight. In my opinion, I have Inoue. He's one of the pound for pound best. I just don't think Jason Maloney will be able to handle his power once he starts feeling it. In my opinion, I see this being maybe a 7th round stoppage, maybe sooner. You never know with Inoue with that power. Now moving on, we're going to be moving to 130. Herring says that, you know, there's the WBO saying that he needs to face his mandatory by January 2021. I don't know if that's going to happen. Jamel has talked about that he needs to, you know, overcome like a scratched cornea and that he has some other, you know, injuries that he's going to be trying to recover from. He just signed with MTK, so clearly he's really going after that Frampton fight. He has openly talked on social media about that being his last fight and then retiring. Good for him. Hopefully he gets paid well. I think he will for that fight. Now moving on, we're going to be talking about lightweight, but we're not going to be talking about a lightweight. We're going to be talking about Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. basically calls out everybody right now. I don't know what's going on with him, but he seems to be calling out Crawford. And then he was, you know, for a while he was talking about fighting Shakur Stevenson. And now he started calling out Devin Haney. Then Devin Haney said, all right, let's do it. Let's dance. So the contract was signed by Haney, sent to Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. was willing to sign, but didn't like the rematch clause in there. So I think they're working on that now. It does look like that Devin Haney might be fighting Gary Russell Jr. I'm very interested in this fight. I think that's not a bad fight for Devin Haney. It's better than what was possibly going to happen, which was Gamboa. And I'm not hating on Gamboa, but just Gamboa is up there. He's almost 40 years old. Okay. I don't need to see Gamboa fight Devin Haney. I want to see Devin Haney deal with someone with some fast hands like Gary Russell Jr. It's a little bit more interesting fight. I still probably have Devin Haney winning in that, but I could see also Gary Russell Jr. giving Devin Haney a little bit of trouble early on, and then Devin Haney adapting and overcoming. So moving on from that, we're going to stay at lightweight, and we're talking about Ryan Garcia and Luke Campbell. Boy, oh boy, am I excited for this fight. I can't wait for this. Paperwork is done. They're looking at November 14th in California for this to happen. I believe they're not going to have a crowd for this fight, most likely, especially if they're having it in California. I don't expect any kind of crowd, but I am glad to see that they're moving closer. And I also like the date. The date is, in my opinion, better than if they did it in October, late October, because there's a lot of other fights that are going to possibly be happening around that time. And I'm really excited to see what happens here. I'm just excited because I think that we're going to see what Ryan Garcia can do. It's really going to be a benchmark for him. If he does well and wins, I think that's going to be a massive win for him. If he loses, that's not the end of his career. He's so young that we could really see him make adjustments, come back, and really kind of shine. So moving on from that, we're going to be moving into the biggest fight of the year, if you ask me, and that is Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez. So let me break down some of the information we have for this. It looks like right now we are going to be having this fight in October. It looks like it's October 17th is the date. Great timing. I think that both guys are clearly prepared for this. Teofimo Lopez, I want to talk about a little bit about Teofimo Lopez, and then we'll talk a little bit about Loma. A couple things I like about Teofimo Lopez. One is he looks like he is always in the gym. I mean, always in the gym. On social media, all you see is him in the gym, constantly working. As much as I don't like his mouth and how much he talks, I have to give the kid credit. He seems very dedicated. He seems very motivated. And I like the fact that he's, he talks a lot, but he's actually trying to walk the walk. And that's one thing I have to give Teofimo Lopez credit for. He's actually going after arguably top 3, if not number 1 pound for pound fighter in the entire world. If you don't like Teofimo Lopez, that's pretty bold. And if he does win, he becomes an instant star. He does. He's unified all the belts basically, other than the WBC, which was gifted to Devin Haney. He's basically been gifted. He's basically has the possibility, they've talked about even giving him the franchise champion belt if he beats, Lomachenko. So it's very possible that in the end, we could have Teofimo Lopez have all the belts other than the regular WBC. He gets to become the franchise champion for the WBC. And essentially, he just is the king at lightweight. Now, with Lomachenko, one thing that's interesting is that Loma isn't a big trash talker. He's not. But that's why this kind of works out so well, is because, well, Teofimo Lopez on a daily basis has a little soundbite or clip or says something where he's either talking about how he feels like Lomachenko's arrogant, which I thought was funny, or he's talking about how he doesn't believe the hype and that he's going to put the end of the hype train. All these little bits that the Teofimo Lopez comes out with, I think is just, it really is selling the fight. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that it's gotten to the point now where even Lomachenko trash talked a little bit, like how he's gonna make him pay basically for all the words that he's been saying and everything like that. So even Loma's trash talking a little bit, which normally he doesn't say anything. The other thing that I love about this, it's not going to be pay-per-view. I mean, can we talk about that? It's not going to be pay-per-view, and this is probably the biggest fight of the entire year. I don't think it gets much better. So I'm super excited for this fight. Let me know who you guys have down in the comments for this fight. I personally have Lomachenko. I'll do a whole fight kind of breakdown and prediction video once we get a little bit closer to it. Do you guys have Loma? Do you have Lopez? And let me know why. What round do you think it's going to end in? But with that said, we're going to keep moving along. Now we're going to be moving up to welterweight, and that is Mikey Garcia. It basically wants the Pacquiao fight. Now, look, I think everyone wants the Pacquiao fight that's at that weight class because everyone knows what it brings, and that's big money. Now, we've heard about Crawford possibly getting this fight. Mikey, I think it wouldn't be a bad fight for Pacquiao. I think that Mikey's beatable. We saw, against Errol Spence, but that's different. Pacquiao's not going to use the same tactics as Spence. Spence is a very large welterweight and uses just pure power to kind of muscle you, break you down. Pacquiao uses speed and power. He's just a little bit different. He's a little bit different tactician. I would be more curious about the Mikey Garcia and Pacquiao fight. Crawford, yeah, I'd love to see that fight, of course, but I'm more interested in Crawford and Spence if that ever happens. So for me, I think this is a good fight. I could actually see this being a pretty competitive fight. Now, Mikey's last fight against Jesse Vargas, unanimous decision, good performance. I think that was a good bounce back, good opponent, bounce back from that Errol Spence loss. So I'm excited to see what happens here. I think Mikey's also had a little bit more time at this weight class. You know what I mean? He jumped 2 weight classes to fight Errol Spence. Very interesting move. And I think now that he's been there for a little while, I'm very curious to see how he's adapted. See if he's, bulked up a little bit more, filled out a little bit more at that weight class. So I'm very excited to see if this does happen and what this all could mean. Now going from welterweight, we're going to go up to middleweight. And that is, the first story is going to be about Jaime Munguia. It's looking like he's going to be fighting in October. Big fan of this kid. He's young. He's very hungry. He has great size for him. And I want to see how he kind of develops overall. But glad to see him back in the ring. They're talking about the 17th or the 30th. If I was them, I would certainly push it to the end of October because I don't think anyone's going to watch him if he's obviously sharing the same date as Lopez and Lomachenko. Some people are critical of him. They feel like he lost to Dennis Hogan. Regardless, I'm excited to see what he can do as he develops overall, and we'll see where he goes and how he looks in October. Moving on from that, we're going to be now talking about the Charlo. So the Charlo brothers, people are a little bit split on this, and that is the pay-per-view is going to be basically $75. I don't think it's that bad. Now, the reason I say that is because you're essentially going to have, well, you're guaranteed both Charlos fighting very solid opponents. I mean, Rosario is a fantastic opponent, and Devchenko is also a fantastic opponent. So I'm really pumped for both of those fights. But there's also going to be several other title fights on those cards. They're going to split up the cards. They're not going to be fighting on the same one, which makes it even more intriguing. I don't think it's that bad. I know that UK, fight fans would absolutely be outraged if they had to pay like 60 quid for something like this. But, us Americans, we're kind of used to it. Considering the level of the title fights, the main events are such high quality, I'm game for it. I don't have a huge problem with it. I'm just excited to see both Charlo brothers fight on the same night. And I like the fact they split them up. They used to fight on the same card occasionally, and I get that, but I kind of like the fact that they're going to be doing two separate cards. That allows for more fights overall. I'm starting to kind of warm up to the UFC having like a dozen fights in a row. So I kind of like the fact that there's more fights going on in general. So I'm all for it. Moving on from that, Canelo, the big news this week with him is that he is suing DAZN, Golden Boy, and Oscar De La Hoya. Now, I already did a whole video breaking this down, so if you want to see all the kind of details and more information about that, I'll put a little card up here so you can check that out. Now, what's interesting about this is that, there was errors, I guess, or there was an error with his suit. So he has some time to refile that, and he has to basically, look over it, go over again with his lawyers, and then resubmit it because it was thrown out by the courts. Oscar De La Hoya came out and basically just pointed a finger at DAZN that they didn't follow up on their contracts. They're not following through on those. So he's blaming DAZN 100%, but let's be honest, Oscar, you certainly weren't perfect with this either. You didn't disclose certain information to Canelo in general, so he's also a little bit at fault. But I see him, Golden Boy and him pointing fingers at DAZN, which, don't get me wrong, DAZN did a lot wrong in this whole situation, but still, Oscar's not exactly squeaky clean either. Going from middleweight, we are going to go up to light heavyweight. And that is Beterbiev suffered a rib injury during training, so his fight will be postponed. They don't exactly have a date set up yet for that, but it looks like that's probably going to be in maybe December instead of October. It's supposed to be on the 23rd. So I am excited to see him get back in the ring. I am a huge Beterbiev fan. It's too bad that he did have the rib injury, but obviously he doesn't want to go in the ring not being 100%. Even though his opponent, I don't see him giving him any trouble, it's still something, understandable. Now moving up to regular heavyweight, Garcia is talking about, returning in November on a date in Russia. I want to see how he does at heavyweight. He's a good size. He's not the biggest heavyweight, but he's 6'4". He probably walks around at 215, no problem. 220, I could see him at. He was cruiser, and I just see a guy this big being pretty decent. And what's interesting about Garcia, if you ask me, is that if they do end up making this new weight class, which they're talking about making it between 200 and 225 or 220, he would be a perfect candidate for this. Now, there was some talk about him, Deontay Wilder. These guys are basically tailor-made for this weight class, and I find it interesting. Tony Bellew, I guess, has been put in charge for this to kind of do some more research and kind of flesh this weight class out. I could see Garcia certainly doing well at that weight class and not having to face guys like Fury, Joshua. I mean, the really heavy hitters at regular heavyweight. Moving on from that and going over to the UK, Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois look like their date is going to be moved to late November, either the 21st or the 28th. Great fight. I think that, the UK boxing fans are super pumped for this. And I know this for a fact because I think it was Michael Benson on Twitter. put up a poll, which fights are you most excited for, and this one won. And a lot of people were like, how can you say that you're more excited for this than Devchenko and Charlo? I get it, you know, they're both local. They're both knockout guys, so I'm excited to see it in general. I know the UK fan base is. American fan base, not so much, but come on. I mean, Daniel Dubois especially could be a major force in the heavyweight division moving forward. You know, right now we have Anthony Joshua and Fury and, you know, Deontay Wilder kind of owning the heavyweight division and kind of the top of the heavyweight division. But all those guys are in their 30s, and Daniel Dubois has time on his side. So I'm curious to see how he does. Now, he does have to get back by Joe Joyce. And even though on this channel, I have hated on Joe Joyce time and time again for being very slow, he is a hard-hitting heavyweight. So we'll see how he does. Now, this is a kind of just silly story I saw, and that's Dillian Whyte saying, I got dropped, you know, but I got right up afterwards. Like, basically being like, I wasn't totally out. I wasn't totally gone. It's just like, I don't know. Maybe you got some head injury, Whyte, because Dillian Whyte was completely knocked out. I mean, totally knocked out. I don't really understand the statement from him, but, you know, I think Dillian Whyte's so embarrassed right now that he's just trying to save face with this. Speaking of Dillian Whyte and who he might be interested in fighting after if he wins against Povetkin, which that's an interesting fight, that rematch. Parker came out and said, I really want a rematch with Dillian Whyte. This to me is a very interesting rematch if it happens. And the reason being that, you know, Joseph Parker had Dillian Whyte. Not only, you know, did he knock him down, but he had him very hurt near the end of that fight. And, you know, there were moments where Joseph Parker certainly could have gotten the KO if there was just a little bit more time here and there, or if he had landed the punch just a little bit sooner. So I would love to see this rematch. I actually think this would be a great rematch. Joseph Parker, you know, hasn't really been fighting anyone. There's talks about him fighting, you know, guys in Australia or New Zealand. Obviously there's a lot of travel restrictions right now, so I think he's a little bit limited, but still, like, this to me would be a perfect fight. If Dillian Whyte does win against Povetkin, I would absolutely think this would be a great stepping stone. Dillian Whyte, this would be a good move for him because he's already beaten Joseph Parker technically. And even though, you know, he had issues with him at certain points in it, I still think he would go in there feeling fairly confident, especially after such a brutal knockout. He beats Povetkin, goes against a guy that he's already beaten before and feels like he could probably knock out and beat again. I think that would be a smart move. Build up his confidence a little bit more to get back in the groove before he starts going for, well, other major heavyweights that are in that, you know, the elite level. And then finally, last story I'd like to kind of talk about, and that's Roy Jones Jr. talking about anticipating Mike Tyson to come out, you know, just firing on all cylinders in round one. Now, look, I'm going to do a whole another fight prediction, kind of break down a little bit more of the Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson thing once we get a little bit closer, because obviously they bumped it out to November 28th. I think it's hard to tell exactly how this fight's going to go, but, you know, one thing I did see was Mike Tyson was recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I love Joe Rogan. I'm a big fan of him, but man, it was sometimes, once in a while, Joe has someone on that he truly admires and is a little bit starstruck by. And with Mike Tyson, you could see it. You know, he's hyping up the fight for Mike. Mike's trying to be a salesman, and Mike's not a very good salesman. So Joe Rogan's like, oh yeah, of course it's going to be like a real fight. It's like, Joe, if you did some research about this fight, there's a lot of stipulations. You know, if someone gets cut, it's getting stopped. They're wearing heavier gloves. I'm sure there are other stipulations going on in terms of what you can and can't do, and when the ref will stop things. I don't think this thing's going to get too out of control. It could. I'm not trying to, you know, totally be a wet blanket about it, but I just don't think we're going to get the thing that Joe Rogan was talking about. I don't think we're going to get the fight that's going to be out of control crazy, or two guys going full steam ahead the whole time, especially when Mike was talking about being really ready to do a full 8 rounds, which was interesting in that podcast. I mean, Mike looks great, and Roy's been active, you know, staying in the gym active for quite a while. So anyways, with that said, that's what I have for this week. Thanks for stopping by the channel. If you're new, we do have this also on Spotify, Apple, iTunes. So if you want to listen to the podcast rather than watch it here on YouTube, or vice versa, if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes and you want to watch the video version, we're here on YouTube. So thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.